Thank you. Okay, hey everyone. So I'm Elliott. I'm one of the co-founders of Signals.
I get to sit, he has to stand.
So we're going to talk to you about the future of research integrity. Before I do that, just a note, there's a Slido poll at some point. So if you can have your phones ready, that'll speed us up. Okay, so we'll talk about the future, but before that, talk a bit about the past. I'm going to give you a few examples of research fraud that's happened over the last few decades. So first we got William Summerlin. So he was a dermatologist at the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York. And he published something pretty impressive. He managed to transplant skin between two genetically different species. People tried to replicate this, they couldn't. So his investigation into his work, so to try and convince his colleagues that this was really happening, he got a pen and he started colouring in some mice, bits of black on the white skin and saying that was where the skin was transplanted. Obviously, there's an inquiry. As you can see from this New York Times article, he was charged with fraud and fired. In the 80s, we had two really prolific authors, John Darcy and Robert Slutsky. So John was a rising star at Harvard Medical School. He'd had a pretty short career, but he'd already had over 100 publications. Robert Slutsky, who I couldn't find a picture for, he was publishing one article every 13 days. The reason they could publish so much was because they were completely making up the data. They got caught by their colleagues, and they got an investigation to them. Turned out a lot of it was just made up. But they both did something pretty interesting, and at the same time, and we still see it today in publication fraud. They were just adding co-authors to their articles that had nothing to do with the research. It's just to try and trick the editors into thinking, this must be like a really exciting piece of research because it's by these really prestigious researchers.
One of the things I love about this case, if you look at that quote, so Slutsky recognized that Darcy was a fraudster because Darcy had the same publication profile that Slutsky did. So it takes a fraud to know a fraud, apparently.
It's a case from the 90s that most of you will be aware of. It's come up already in the last couple of days. So Andrew Wakefield. He published an article in The Lancet, saying there's a link between the MMR vaccine and autism. We could see the power, of the self-correcting scholarly record because really quickly this was refuted. It then turned out that he cherry-picked data, he misrepresented that data, and he had some conflicts of interest. So this was quickly retracted. So, good for the scholarly record. But over the next decade, we start to see a decrease in MMR vaccinations and an increase in measles. So we can see where this kind of research fraud can have real-world impacts.
That impact continues today, as probably everyone's aware. Anti-vaccine groups in the U.S. have still cite Wakefield's research in their bid to decrease levels of immunity or increase levels of vaccine use. And in fact, this chart here from The Economist shows how much vaccination levels have decreased in red states in the U.S. in the past 10 years.
In the early 2000s, we've got Jan-Hendrik Schon. He produced some pretty amazing sounding research. He had these breakthroughs in organic electronics, in superconductivity and nanotechnology. People thought he was going to win the Nobel Prize. But then, when people start looking more closely at his data, something started happening that is similar again to what we see today. The data seemed too perfect. If you see these lines on these graphs, they're almost identical, but they're from different studies. And experiments had identical noise, which was really kind of weird. There have been investigations into his work. It turned out he kept no lab books. He deleted raw data. He destroyed original samples. You can start to see where data is a really important part of these investigations. It turned out he was making it all up, and as a result, he had 7 retractions in Nature, 6, so 8 retractions in Science, and he did not win the Nobel Prize. Lastly, Haruko Obokata, she became temporarily famous when she published a Nature article about STAT. This was an impossibly simple way of creating stem cells. She would take a regular cell, dip it in some mild acid, and it would turn into a stem cell. This would have been a huge breakthrough in regenerative medicine. But again, the self-correcting scholarly record happened within just a couple of days. People like, this is nonsense, allegations of misconduct. And you can see she did something that we see in a lot of cases, possibly. So on the left, we can see the blots that were in the gels that were in the article. If we change the contrast on lane 3, you can see these like straight lines in the middle and different colors because she's spliced another image into there. So it turned out, again, these weren't the results were real. These were retracted, and she was later fired. Okay, so the reason I'm showing you these examples is one, they're quite interesting, but also to show that research fraud isn't new. It's been over decades, happened all over the world. And the reason for this is because of the incentive structures. They were there in the 70s and they're here today. So it's a huge pressure on researchers to publish. We've talked about that quite a bit over the last couple of days. These are ambitious people. They want career advancement. Some want desire. They have a desire. They have a desire for recognition, and they need grants. So they need the most novel, exciting results. And in some cases, there are financial incentives, as we saw with Andrew Wakefield. But the problem is that pressure on researchers seems to be increasing. So, for example, in China, a lot of large hospitals are wanting their researchers, not researchers, their doctors, to publish articles in SCI journals. As quote here, it says, as young doctors, we feel the great pressure to publish. The last decade, India introduced the academic performance indicator system. It's led to someone saying publications become the mantra and motto for academics. And this has been linked to the rise in predatory publishing in India. In the Netherlands, there was a really large study where the researchers found that publication pressure was linked to frequently doing questionable research practices. And this is things like fabrication and falsification of data. So while these examples I showed you before, these individual bad actors, we're starting to see research integrity issues at scale now. So I think we can start to see this around 2010, 2011, when IEEE published the 7,000 conference proceedings that were later retracted because they didn't meet these standards. What's that standards? In 2013, Springer and IEEE withdrew over 120 articles made by Citation. If you know what Citation is, it's a tool that can make you something that looks a bit like an article, but it's gibberish. In the same year, Science reported on what we now know as papermills. They said there's a flourishing academic black market where authorship fees range from around $1,500 to over $26,000. 2014, Sage retracted 60 articles of peer review and citation rings, so we start to see this kind of coordinated misconduct. In 2016, something similar happened to Springer, with a new record of 107 retractions of peer review. This continued to increase. IOP retracted 500 paper mill articles in 2022, and then now the most infamous example of Hindawi retracting in 2023 over 8,000 paper mill articles, and that just continues to increase. So we can see this problem is getting worse. Of course, the kind of remiss to me not to mention that generative AI is going to have an impact on this. Back in 2010, when these paper mills were getting started, they'd have had to make thousands of papers. And how could they have done this? They could have used SciGen, as we saw, but it's just gibberish. It's easy to see. They could plagiarize, but there's tools to identify this. Once you know it's there, it's easy to prove. Or they could fabricate the whole thing, but that would be really time-consuming and probably take some kind of domain expertise. But now, AI can do it for you in seconds and really cheap. I find it really hard to tell the difference between these cell images, which are real and which are AI generated. And you can make something that looks like a paper, quite convincing thing in seconds using something like ChatGPT. To exemplify that, here's a fake article about fake articles by me, Nicko, and ChatGPT. This is today, where Nicko is going to talk to you a little bit.
So, by the way, I was added to that article on ChatGPT without my knowledge. So publishers are obviously, as many of you in the room know, are investing a lot more in research integrity. They're hiring or expanding their research integrity teams, either identifying experts from within or bringing in external expertise in terms of hiring. Publishers are pioneering new research integrity workflows. They are also, there have been a number of new collaborations. So obviously COPE has tried to support evolving policies around research integrity, but we also have the United's Act and STM Integrity Hub initiatives. And then publishers have been working with startups, some of whom are listed here. The other thing that's changing now is that publishers are increasingly working with sleuths. That's a community of dedicated researchers who are allocating personal and professional time, effort, reputation, expertise to identifying problematic publications and trying to preserve and protect and uphold the scholarly record. So you can think of them in two ways. There are researchers who are building tools. So examples of whom are Cyril Labbe and Jennifer Byrne and Guillaume Cabernac, developing a variety of different tools over the years. A number of these have been brought together into the problematic paper screener, which is a great public resource. And then there are sleuths who are identifying literature and to flag cases of academic misconduct, and then they notify institutions and publishers about their findings. So you'll see here, just from this list of the 4 individuals here, between them, they have flagged over 10,000 articles. These have led to thousands of retractions. Rene Aquarius estimates that he spends 15 to 20 hours every week on identifying problematic research. However, despite their efforts, the community is small, and there's no way there are enough experts to handle the flood of problematic papers that are being generated now. Now, some of that is just an issue of scale, and it's being addressed technologically and through new workflows and policies, but some of it is also cultural. As can be seen, a good example of this, and people maybe don't feel equipped or reluctant to comment. There was a survey conducted of National Science Foundation fellows in 2023, asking about attitudes towards research integrity, and the fellows, only 31 said they would report misconduct. Only 31% would report misconduct, and part of it was fear of negative consequences, negative repercussions from reporting it. But interestingly, half of the respondents felt like, and these are NSF fellows, right? Highly trained, highly accomplished researchers. They didn't feel like they had the ethics training to prepare them for raising issues of academic fraud or problematic publications. And of course, correcting the scholarly record can take a very long time once an issue has been identified. The investigations are often by nature quite complex. Then there is coordination between different stakeholders, and sometimes a desire among the stakeholders to shift accountability for rectifying the issue from one stakeholder to another. We can leave it at that. And then clearly it's a process that wasn't designed to deal with retractions at scale. So that as a result, the process is long and it can be very, very costly for all concerned. And on that cheery note, I'll hand it back to Elliott to talk about the future.
Yeah. So the future. So what we did, we reached out to a bunch of sleuths, some research integrity experts, publishers, and asked them a few questions to get their take. So we've kind of distilled those down into a few takeaways, or I'll have quotes from some of them. So we mentioned about sleuths, they do really hard work. There's a very small number of them. We think these people looking at literature is something valuable. So we asked the sleuths and the integrity people, should sleuths receive more recognition or awards? If so, what form could that take? Many mentioned acknowledgement. They'd like to be on retraction notices when that happens. They'd like to see change in perceptions, so recognized for a positive contribution towards science, rather than being seen as, say, troublemakers. Still on recognition, they'd like broader recognition. This could be awards. It could be, their contributions counting towards promotion or grants. Many said about professionalizing the role, so maybe having this an internal role of a sleuth at a publisher, or paying them for consulting work. But many did mention, avoid this kind of like idea of cash per paper reported or retracted. I think this will make some really kind of bad incentive structures. And one thing Renee, the sleuths mentioned, something that publishers could kind of solve really quite easily. I'd like to get confirmation of receipt if I flag papers with research integrity departments at publishers. I think this doesn't happen half the time. So pretty easy just to send him an email. So yes, looking ahead to the next 3 years, what threats to research integrity worry you the most? As you may expect, AI came up. Wu, who is a sleuth, mentioned strategies we previously used to detect false content will no longer be effective. I think there's a concern at publishers as well. These tools aren't working anymore, and there was also kind of worries about the sophistication of organized paper mills, like how they're going about this. I mentioned that retractions should be part of a self-correcting scholarly record. Like I'm showing those examples where this is really, really important. But a high volume of retractions that we're seeing now and probably continue to see could actually undermine trusted science and institutions and could be used by some politicians to potentially defund science. And one thing came up that I think is really important is this idea of collateral reputational damage to honest researchers. Kim puts this pretty well. Some nations and institutions are becoming so synonymous with misconduct that I also worry about bias and impact on DEI. I hear many people say, they don't trust research from specific countries, but there are lots of honest, great researchers in those places, and we'd be probably harming both ourselves and them if we have those biases. So, how do you see research integrity evolving in the next few years? Almost everyone said, RI will continue to be a critical issue, and it will become increasingly challenging. There's a lot of talk about collaboration. Wei Mun from eLife mentioned, we'll see continued efforts towards a more collaborative approach in tackling research integrity threats. People mentioned collaboration both between publishers, but also collaboration between like publishers and sleuths. This is something that's apparently getting better and better. Everyone thinks that technology will play a greater part. It'll increase efficiency, help us detect more fraud. And ultimately, there'll just be more checks happening at a publisher, but there will also be greater responsibility on institutions to be doing these kind of checks. And Graham, who is kind of famous for his Twitter profile about fake articles, he mentions that he's really worried that if we don't do something now, it's taken 350 years to create the scholarly record, and within just a few years, it could become untrustworthy. And lastly, what steps do you think researchers, institutions, and publishers need to take to improve research integrity? I think that often was less talk, more action. Examples of this being streamlined guidelines, action against bad actors, support and protection for whistleblowers. Increased awareness of the issues and education is super important. As Elena from TIR says, collaborating between research integrity teams and publishers and institutions on educating and guiding the actions of researchers is key. Increasing transparency, super important. So open peer review, open data. I think we'll hear about that in the next talk. And thinking about data provenance. So where does the data come from? And the biggest, thing that came up, what we can help address, is publish or perish. Again, as Mu puts this, the root problem is the very toxic and harmful publish or perish culture that scientists have been indoctrinated with for decades. We need to reevaluate how we evaluate science and scientists and reduce the toxic pressure as much as possible. Yeah, so now it's over to you. So we ask you a few questions and get your take on what you think.
Yes, because we had experts outside the room. We have experts in the room. So we are going to do a Slido poll. Can you just go to the, yeah. So again, and I was able to take some tips from Rick Anderson, who masterfully managed everybody through the Slido process. So please repeat, just listen to what Rick said. So yeah, scan it. If you can't, go to slido.com and type in the code. And then Elliott, you're monitoring, right? So we'll give you a minute to do that. I think you have to go.
It'll become active when I push the next slide.
Has everybody had enough time to get the? Yep.
See some phones still. We're good. Okay.
So here's our first question. So I mean, I feel like I know what the answer to this is going to be. Whoop, there it is. It's just one.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh, it hasn't worked.
Yes. So.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. We have a different screen.
Oh.
Me and you. So let me just go back.
Well, it's okay.
Here.
There we go. It's simple enough. So yeah. So you think research integrity issues will improve, get worse, stay the same? Yes, I can't see from here when we're close. Oh, I can. It's actually 74. Yeah, we're getting pretty close. So, right. Looks like we're all of. It would be if we get time for Q&A. I want the improve parties to comment, please. That would be great. Let's go on to the next one, though. Mindful of time. Thanks for the participation. So, this is a particular pet peeve. Not it's more than a pet peeve. Yes. So, do you think incentive structures will change? And I guess I don't need to remind you, but if they needed to change, we'd have to actually change not just university policies, but we'd have to talk to rankings, the university rankings providers, and get them to start focusing on something other than publication output. So it's a naughty issue. Again, the yes respondents, you're very welcome to comment if we get time. And then the last one is requires a little more work. So there's a free text option on the poll. If you could write in 2 to 4 words what you think worries you most about the next 3 years in research integrity. Cool, right? Yeah, I shouldn't be laughing.
It's really interesting. If while you're doing this,
Yeah.
can you like put their hand up if they're like optimistic about AI in research integrity, like if they're doing good things?
Really?
Significantly less. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Well, we'll have to capture this and share it. It's interesting that a lot of so dominant is AI, of course. Elon, yeah, thanks, Elon. But some of the other, the one thing that's not coming through here maybe is people being, I think, tarred with the same brush, because I think we are seeing that. So if you're an author from Turkey or Saudi Arabia or China or India, your work may be suspect, and that's very, very unfair, since the vast majority of researchers are, of course, publishing good and sound research.
Someone mentioned research security. I'd be quite interested to like chat about that after, whoever that was.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. I think we get to collect these. My Slido account, so we'll share this afterward. It's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, really.
AI is obviously come out as the biggest worry. Okay, thank you. So we're just gonna end with our own thoughts on what we think the future research sector will look like. So when I think about this, I tend to put it in 3 pillars: technology, organizations, people. Technology is also obviously this is focused on AI at the moment, and this has risks and opportunities. So it's going to be easier and cheaper, increasingly so, to create fake papers. They're going to look increasingly convincing. You'll be able to fabricate data really easily. So you just say, "Can you provide the data to back this up?" They'll be able to do this. They can write fake peer reviews very easily if they get into the process. And then a thing that concerns me, and I think someone put up in Slido, is the idea of like AI agents kind of automating and manipulating the publishing process. So essentially doing what a paper mill does now, but automatically, and kind of learning like how to get around this. So I think that it's going to be really important that more and more experts are looking into the articles and content and saying, finding these problems like Sleeves are doing. But we're also going to need to look beyond the manuscript, find out if it's credible. So looking into things like author credibility and the behavior, having this kind of like graph analytics type approach. So there's a screenshot from a view in the graph that we use that connects like authors and institutions and other works. Looking at data provenance, where has this data come from? And we did this in the workshop the last couple of days as well. I think there'll be much more, sharing between publishers. So sharing data, things on maybe like who is a bad actor, for example, like looking to what other industries do to try and solve this problem. And also best practice sharing between publishers as well. It may it's yet to be seen whether this is something that is competitive between publishers. With things like STM, like probably not. Yep. I think there'll be broader involvement from organizations within the scholarly industry. So publishers are already doing quite a lot. It's kind of becoming business as usual for research integrity. They're growing their teams or creating them now. Institutions and funders, I think, need to catch up. I think they will have a role to play. Institutions from, at the beginning, education for researchers. How do you deal with the problems? How do you not do misconduct? But also evaluating articles. Every grant that goes out from an institution is checked by that institution. You may be able to imagine them doing that to articles too. And funders, making sure that the funding they give is to trustworthy people, but also that the money they're spending is being used in a kind of high integrity manner. And on top of that, we think there'll be much more connected, streamlined processes between these people. So, they need to collaborate and communicate to get these issues resolved. We talked about the retraction process. This can take things like 2 years. Sometimes it's because people don't know who to contact at different different organizations. And so having standardized processes that could take something like the retraction process going from 2 years down to a few months. And also, people. So it's really, really important that the scholarly record is accurate and trustworthy. But behind the research, there's researchers. So we need to set a few things in here. First is protection and support for researchers who are reporting issues. It's maybe supporting the people who spend all this time looking for issues and flagging it. It may be supporting from protection to whistleblowers. So if they do that they don't have to leave their job as well. I mentioned on the education level, the institution level, there needs to be education, how not, but how to deal with it if you see it. But also incentives around being like a high integrity researcher and creating that culture of research integrity. And then lastly, fair processes. If someone's accused of misconduct, they have the right to defend themselves. We have to make sure that it was actually them. And then if someone is responsible for misconduct, it may have been their fault, but this is one of the only things that they can do that would get them fired from their job as a researcher. There may need to be some rehabilitation in there, treat them kind of fairly as we would in other parts of society. Of course, at the same time, actually having consequence for doing misconduct. Okay, so just to conclude, research fraud and its underlying incentive structures have existed for decades. Fraud appears to be getting worse. I don't think, and it seems like you also don't think, that it's going away anytime soon. Integrity has become embedded into publisher workflows. Expect that we'll also become more, it's business as usual. We'll also start to see that through researcher workflows, institution, and the funder workflows as well. Large-scale fraud and new technology, particularly AI, is presenting us with these like emerging threats and just largely uncertainty around what's going to happen. Ultimately, the scholarly record is an incredibly valuable resource to us. And so as an industry, we really need to be taking collective action into safeguarding the trustworthiness of it. Okay. Thanks to those that contributed to the answers to the questions that I asked them. And just thank you as well for listening and contributing. Cheers.
Much, guys. Great presentation, highly interactive, wonderful stuff. Right, we're going to have a quick transition now as the panel come to the stage, and we have also an online panelist who will be connecting any moment. So if you just bear with us for probably a minute while they take their seats, and we'll get going.